he was into real estate. We know that because he had property that he was managing. We know someone had just got married. So we know it was someone that kept contract or was loyal enough to keep their word or to embrace the contracts that they had established. And we know that we had these three categories of people, and all of them RSVP with regret. Then he goes out into the city and he invites everyone in the city. And he said, yet there is still room. And then he goes out into the highways and hedges. So to me, when I analyzed that text, I concluded that three people combined had more capacity than an entire city and the regions around the city. Those three people had bandwidth, had intellectual bandwidth, that they got invited to consume an entire feast. And the Bible talks about God preparing a banqueting table before us. And I believe so many Christians are full on carnal candies that they can't eat the deep revelation of meat. And God wants to bring us into the time where we are not just sipping on milk relative to revelation and prophetic insight, that He gives us the capacity to meditate, ruminate, and embrace more things. And it takes a lot of open-mindedness. You never have a person who thinks critically that is not open-minded. And usually people that are narrow-minded or restricted-minded or closed-minded, they are not critical thinking. So what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is the ability to think clearly and deeply about a problem and make a logical judgment for solving it. It is a kind of thinking where you consider all the scenarios and then you analyze and you examine it and then you come up with an effective conclusion. So instead of believing on someone else's opinion, you begin to trust your own because you're open to consider all of the scenarios, and then you make the best decision based on wisdom. One of the things that critical thinking requires, it requires a lot of patience, a lot of observation. You have to be an observing individual, and you have to be someone that reads. You read even dissenting opinions, and you consider a dissenting opinion. Even if you're around the boardroom and you're the chair of the board of directors, for instance, all of us who are thinkers, we are usually very opinionated, and we are really usually convinced that how we think about something is the right way. But a critical thinker brings their ideas to the table and opens the table, raise a question. So a critical thinker is not always looking for answers. They are looking for the right questions to find the right answers. And the scripture says, ask and it shall be given you. And in this season, finding the right questions and articulating the right questions is more important than discovering the right answers. Because if you have the right questions, you'll get the right answers. So the issue is never with answers. The issue is the right questions so that you can find the right answers. And that's what critical thinking is all about. It's an important skill to learn. It's going to help you to implement innovative ideas. And if there's ever a time we need creativity and innovation, it is during this generation. It helps you to understand the connection and the logical connection and the rational connection, not just logical, but the rational connection between two things that seemingly are unrelated and seemingly disconnected or may have no relevance to an issue or problem that you're trying to address. So this is all critical thinking is. Critical thinking allows you to listen to someone's opinion or statements that people are making and discern intent and discern motive and discern propaganda and discern conspiracy theories. And you're able to listen with a different kind of ear before you come to your conclusion. And, over the last year and a half, there's been so many conspiracy theories and so many quote unquote experts that are making these statements, and you can shoot holes right in the statements. And unless you have the ability of critical thinking, then you're going to be controlled. You're going to be controlled by the kingdom of darkness, because people take most things at face value. You're able to discern deception. You're able to inform yourself. You're able to take a stand. You're able to speak up. You're able to show up with integrity. You're able to show up as a thought leader. And that takes critical thinking. Critical thinkers don't follow their emotions, or they are not subject to whims of emotion. They use a kind of higher cognitive skill of reasoning, which includes logic, reason, judgment, logical thoughts, rationality, and wisdom. Why is that all important? Let me give you scripture. Colossians 3:1. If you then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above. You got to be able to elevate your thinking. You got to think at a higher level where Christ sitteth at the right hand of God. Again, we established earlier that when Adam fell, he fell into a realm that he was not wired to live in. He was not wired to live in a realm that is driven by information. He was wired to live in a realm driven by revelation. He was not wired to live in a realm that was driven by facts. He was wired to live in a realm that was driven by faith. He was not wired to live in a world of oppression where people thought for you. He was wired to live in a world of freedom and liberty, where he was free to try things out and mix things together and analyze and postulate and to create and come up with new ideas. And this is very, very important, especially those of you that are in the performing arts or the area of culture. You know, you write music, you produce film, you sing songs, you write plays. The whole idea of critical thinking is tantamount to creativity and originality. You cannot have originality without critical thinking. And what we have today, unfortunately, what we call art, what we call great performances, I think it's great deception because it lacks creativity. And if you are mimicking something that someone else did, that's not creativity. And it's fine to use artists and their performances, whether they're actors, whether they're fine artists, dancers. It's great to be inspired by these great performers and artists and actors. But you've got to be able to put a spin on your own. You've got to give your own take of something, and you've got to come up with something that is original. And again, you don't want to think outside of the box. You want to create new boxes that other things outside of. And, thinking of Mozart, what happened was in his career, he started to go deaf. And some of his greatest pieces was created when he started turning deaf. And why was that? And in his own words, he said that he really couldn't hear the music that was playing around him because he couldn't hear at a distance. So he had to learn the art of hearing from his inner ear. And this is an inside job. And a lot of people judge their own ideas and they second guess themselves. And you will never know how creative and innovative you are until you try it. So what if it blows up in your face? Well, you discovered a way not to do something. And this is how the light bulb was created 1,000 times, 999 times, the 1,000 times. He was successful. And they interviewed him, weren't you discouraged? Did you want to give up? He said, no, I just discovered 999 ways not to create the light bulb. And a critical thinker is just like that. They're going to mix things together. Some things are going to blow up and they say, okay, this didn't work. I'm going to try something else. But everything they do could be considered a success because they're driven by a desire to bring something new to this world, something that would advance the world, something that would make this world a better place, something that would help us to live better, see better, do better, and help us to progress as human beings. And so when we talk about critical thinking, there's the scripture that says, unless you become as a little child. You shall not enter into the kingdom. And, the object lesson was a child, and you ask a question. You say, well, what makes a child a child? And obviously, it's their curiosity, it's their adventure, it's their cognitive flexibility and their cognitive sponginess. They're like sponges. They absorb. You see them playing with their imagination, and they even have a healthy dose of skepticism. So you say, don't do that because, and I'm an adult and I know, but they have a little bit of reservation and skepticism, and they say, well, let me try it. And so you say, don't touch the stove because the stove is hot. And they're skeptic. And they go touch the stove. And didn't I tell you why? Because they have enough sponginess and flexibility. And they have just enough skepticism where they ask, well, what if? What if they're wrong? I mean, they learn by touching and tasting and all of that, but they keep that one if going, and then they have a healthy dose of humility. They're going to try and try, and if they don't succeed, they know where to find help. But at first, they want to do it. And those of you that had a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, and 3-year-old, you want to put their clothes on, and they want to do it. I do it. So they end up with, the left foot on the right, the left shoe on the right foot, and the right shoe on the left foot, and their clothes messed up, and they want to try it. They want to do it. But we've lost that. We don't want to try things because we're afraid of failing. But that's how children are. I have a niece that lives in London, and they were coming through, going back to Bermuda, and they stopped at my house. And the baby was little, and her mother was saying, "Oh, Zaya is getting ready to walk, but she hasn't walked as yet." And in my house, Zaya took her first walk. However, her first step. However, we were in the kitchen, and it was so funny. She was trying to pick herself up, and her legs were wide open, and that she was not going to get steady because her legs were too wide open, and she would fall down, and she would pick herself back. And I say, put your legs a little closer. She put her legs a little closer, and she couldn't get her balance, and she'd fall down and get up and fall down. And then, right before my eyes, I watched this little girl who had fallen and fallen and fallen and gave herself a head clap. She was clapping because she fell, and she picked herself back up, gave herself a clap because she was standing up on her feet. And I think that we don't celebrate those small steps that we take to that big idea, that big breakthrough. We don't stop and celebrate. We may not be where we want to be, but we're on our way. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, and the second, and the third, and the fourth. And so as you're developing your ability to think critically, you start with the small things. Start with watching a movie and analyzing the movie. Start with a problem in the workplace and analyze that problem. Start with an argument that you might have had with your husband or your wife, and use that as a case study. Everything for me is a case study. I'm a COO. And I call her Pharaoh. I'm not going to tell you her name, and because I don't do things like that. I would never tell you her name was Lisa Johnson. I would not tell you that. But she's one of the most brilliant critical thinkers that I've ever met. And she has this uncanny way of connecting dots very quickly. She's a big picture person and a small picture person. Usually you have big picture people and you have small picture people. Very seldom do you have a person that has big picture and small pictures that are able to connect the dots. And what I do with her in order to arrive at a conversation, we have many, many conversations, and I always invite a different opinion than mine. I'm extremely opinionated. I believe what I think we should do is always right. However, I'm open enough to hear other people's opinions. Because at the end of the day, if I make a decision based on someone's opinion, I'm still responsible. Why? Because I asked for their opinion, so I could never blame my staff for something. Why? I made a decision to hire them. So the onus is on me. Always. A lot of people don't engage in that kind of intellectual conversation or dialogue. And we often miss great inspirational, great innovative ideas, especially if you are a critical thinker. I'm a critical thinker. So having people around you who are able to get involved in the process, because usually it's a long process and it can be frustrating to people who are usually not invited around the decision making table. And if you are working for Fortune 500 companies, 9 times out of 10, the average employee is never invited around the table. You are told what to do. You are given a job description and you do exactly what you're told to do, and nobody's asking you for your opinion. Nobody. So you really don't get involved in that high level thought process that goes on every single day in Fortune 500 companies. Every single day they are tweaking something. Every single day they are pushing the envelope. This is why when you have certain software, if you stay on Google long enough or whoever long enough, if you buy anybody's software, they always have upgrades, always, every day. One of the softwares that I have, that I'm using, is a research software. Every single day they're upgrading. They're tweaking this and tweaking that. The question is, when was the last time as a Christian you upgraded your thoughts? When was the last time your thoughts were stretched where you say, okay, I was thinking this way, and it may be age appropriate. It may be stage appropriate, but it may not be the best because it may still be an influence of other people's thoughts and influenced by culture. So when was the last time you had an upgrade in your thinking where someone challenged you and you are opening up to say, okay, there's more than one way to skin a cat? And this is how critical thinkers are. They think, well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And they're always open. They ask people for their perspectives so that they can have almost like a 360 at dealing with ways to meet a need, solve a problem, or ways to innovate. They have a 360 perspective. It reminds me of a movie. And if you want to know more about how to develop your critical thinking, there's this movie called Vantage Point. I watched this movie, and the first 30 minutes I was bored out of my skull because they went to this person and they talked about this, and all the facts were pointing to one person, sort of assassinating the president. But at the end of the movie, not going to give you, I'm not going to expose the whole movie. I saw it with my own eyes along with everybody else. I saw it happen. It was on the screen. And everybody that was telling the facts told the facts and made the same conclusion that I made, only to find out that facts are not truths. A critical thinker excavates. They dig down. They dig deep. They take nothing for face value. And it's, to me, when Jesus taught his disciples, it was like giving them a PhD in kingdom living. That's what it was like. After 3 years, they had a PhD in kingdom living. And guess what? They still, after they graduated, summa cum laude, and Jesus only had one dropout, Judas, but the rest had graduated. Once they graduated, I call it from Kingdom School of Ministry. And Jesus had the first Kingdom School of Ministry. Then they were charged to go into all the world and preach the gospel. First in Judea, then in Samaria, and then into the uttermost parts of the world. In other words, they were going to take this wisdom and they were going to be problem solvers and gap fillers and history makers. Luke 18:17 says, "Verily I say unto you, whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a child or as a little child shall in no wise enter therein." So when you have the whole idea of critical thinking, you maintain the sponginess in your cognitive faculty, you maintain that sponginess. And you always say, okay, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So that's the first way of thinking. The second way of thinking is called complex problem solving. So it's not simple problem solving like learning how to tie a shoe or learning how to cook. It's more complex than this. It's life and death issues. And I remember Operation Desert Storm. Many of you remember Operation Desert Storm. They were in the war room, and I think it was Colin Powell, or one of them was in the war room. And I'm probably getting my history all wrong. But the general was in the war room, and after they had been in the war room, they made some decisions. And those decisions happened to be right. But in the war room, it was a matter of life and death. And so your mind is your war room. And this is where you're going to fight all your battles, all the battles that you will ever fight. Fight economic battles, social battles, relational battles, any struggle, any area of your struggle, you're going to fight it here. This is your war room. And you have to have complex problem solving, because problems are not just single. It's not just unilaterally connected. It's multiplex. And you have to take a complex problem and make it simple, or you make it simplex. So you don't extrapolate the complexity of it, but you break the problem down into bite-sized pieces until the answer becomes simple for you. And this is the way that you find solutions to complex problems. And complex problems require critical thinking. And this is how you become a problem solver. Because in looking at the state of affairs in this world and the kinds of complex problems, which we call systemic. So the problem is systemic. It simply means that you just can't rip it apart, because everything would start crumbling. But you've got to pull pieces apart, and you've got to be able to say, okay, what is the root of this? And sometimes most people think surface. This is the problem. But it goes deeper and greater. Like in the United States of America, we talk about problems and we talk about them so simple, but they're really, really complex. Like, say, for instance, people talk about, well, there's so much problems in the United States of America and the system is wrong. But then you have to ask, well, what if the system actually was built to operate that way? So the problem may not be that you have a system that's the problem. You just have a wrong system. And if you have a wrong system, then what is the system that we want? And you cannot make a change into something if nothing is there.
20, 180. That's how many clients I'm going to get you. And that's how many days it's going to take you to do it. And I will do it.
So if you keep wanting, okay, we got to change America. We got to change the educational system. We've got to change the medical system. And all of that is true. But what do we change into? So we need architects, and we need people who can build alternative models and test the alternative model and then bring those to the table. And I'm talking to believers. I'm talking to us, because there are a lot of people in this world doing a lot of good in this world. And so much resources is being thrown at problems, and you wonder what is taking so long. And I always say, yes, there are a lot of problem solvers in the world, but we need more hands on that. And maybe your piece is what we need to add to this new model. Maybe your cog that you're holding goes in this new machinery, and maybe that's what's missing. And so you should never feel as if when you address a problem that what you bring to the table is too insignificant or too small. It was the rivets that tore open like a zipper that made the Titanic sink. When you think about it, in Saturday Night Live. They had this funny little skit. And they were interviewing the iceberg. And the iceberg said, I get all the bad rap, but I've always been here. I never messed with anyone. I was minding my business. And the Titanic decided to run itself into me. And I should be suing the Titanic. And the Titanic should be getting up, the bad rap. But why do I have to get the bad rap when it wasn't me? When you think about the Titanic, and they did some research on why did it split, because this would be the boat that was unsinkable. It was around that time that the Titanic was being built. All of America was being built, so everybody needed steel. They needed the steel. And at that time, they were looking for steel rivets, the rivets that they seal the parts of the boat with. They were looking for those steel rivets. And they could find most of the steel rivets, but they ran out, and the Titanic had a timeline that they wanted to have their maiden voyage. And so one of the engineers or the architects, I don't know what you call those that build boats, but one of the architects of the boats, and one of those that were responsible for constructing it, they ran out of these rivets. They had steel everywhere else. But in this place, this is what they said. They said, since we can't find them and we're on a deadline, just bring me any, because no one will know and no one will see. And this is how people think. Nobody's going to know. And how are they going to know? Nobody's going to know. But we do know. It's those rivets that are there. And some of them are inferior and some of them are rustic. So instead of using the steel rivets, they use some other kind of alloy rivet. And when they hit the iceberg, the boat should have survived. But guess where it tore? It tore right where they substitute the steel rivet for these alloy rivets. And where it was, it just ripped right open like a zipper. A lot of times what God is doing, he's trying to build our intellectual capacity. But some of us have compromised. It don't take all of that. We don't need to do all of that. All of this protocol and all of this revising and upgrading your thinking and decreeing and declaring and reading the Bible, it don't take all of that, but it does. One of the things that Albert Einstein said, finding solutions to complex problems requires critical thinking. And he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. It's going to be like pouring new wine in old wineskin. And so when you read the book of Exodus 36, we have a problem that is presented. Moses has been charged by God and given an assignment to build this tabernacle. And that was the design. But he has a problem. Why? Because he doesn't know how to do it. So he has this blueprint. And God gives him the architectural rendition of what he has to build. He doesn't know what to do with it. So he goes into industry. He finds Bezalel and Eliab. And this is how he described them. Then what Bezalel and Eliab, every wise-hearted man, in whom the Lord had wisdom and understanding, to know how to work all manner of work for the service of the sanctuary, according to all that the Lord had commanded. And Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab, and every wise-hearted man, in whose heart the Lord had put wisdom. He put it there. It wasn't always there. He built capacity in them. And everyone whose heart stirred him up to come into to do. It's a sacred calling. We get to live your life's purpose in teaching. And they became these matter larges because there was a problem. And then they allowed God to download into their minds how to do what they need to do to solve the problem, because they learned how to think at that level. So when you have the whole idea of critical thinking finds it's the ability to also engage in problem solving activities in order to find a solution for complex problems. So when you deal with data or big data or the world of big data, so when you deal with the world of big data and when you deal with AI, artificial intelligence, computers are getting smarter and smarter than human beings, and everyone is running around and they're believing, okay, AI is going to replace us. AI has the ability maybe to process faster, but what AI cannot do, it cannot create the future. What it does is it looks at everything in the past, and AI then takes all the information from the past, brings it together, and it can prognosticate the future, but it cannot prophesy the future, and it cannot create the future. The only entity in the earth that can create future, it is not AI. AI needs the past, but people do not need the past to create the future. What do they need? They need to think beyond the present, and they need to project themselves in the future and use their creative skills in order to create the future that they want. AI cannot look ahead and come back to humanity and say, I see this in the future. But a human being can. A human being has something that AI can never have. And thus, AI should not be looked at as the enemy. AI should be looked at as something that augments what you do, but it can never replace what you do. And therefore, nobody should be afraid of artificial intelligence because AI can never, ever replace a human being. Number 3, let me get through this really quickly. You've got to think possibility thinking. And this is the art of thinking big. And Genesis 11:6, and the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they began to do, and nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So thinking big is the art of imagination. It's harnessing the faculty of imagination and trusting yourself that on your best day, you can never come up with that idea. So that idea had to come from God. And if it comes from God, with God, all things are possible. So whatever you're currently thinking about doing, whatever you're currently thinking about being, whatever you're currently thinking about acquiring, think bigger. It's already too small. Pray the prayer of Jabez. Ask God to enlarge your intellectual territory. Nothing great happens with small thinking. So you've got to be able to refuse to settle for good enough and average. To be average is to settle for a life determined by external forces, and that's the average person. To be average means you are happy to be like everyone else, living beneath your privileges and performing beneath your potential. You are going to be great. You have greatness in you. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. You were born again to be greater. And we have to understand this, that you are wired for greatness. The opposite of greatness isn't failure. The opposite of greatness is mediocrity. And that's where the average person settles right there. It's good enough. And the enemy of great is good. And people settle for good. This is good enough. I'm living a good life. But God has a greater life for you. It's settling for living living on little and living a life of average, because you refuse to challenge yourself to reach beyond the threshold of comfortable and familiar. It is choosing to live amongst the clutter of the common so that you don't stick out amongst your friends and amongst your family for fear of being misjudged and misunderstood. It's knowing you have it in you, but you lack the courage to step out by faith or go out on a limb because you might fall, or someone might say that you fail. and you're afraid of people's opinion. So you settle for being average so you can avoid the pain of being misjudged or even ridiculed for trying. Some people have mistaken average for being humble or being content. You got to be content with what you got, but it's not. It's failing to recognize that God created his image and then required you to believe that you're his representative. And most people don't because they fear being called arrogant or accused of thinking more highly of themselves than they ought. But the Bible said, it doesn't say that you should think highly of yourself. The Bible says don't think more highly of yourself than you ought. So you should think highly of yourself. And a lot of times people confuse confidence with arrogance. And usually when a confident person shows up, people want to beat them back into submission. This is not anyone that we can control. When you start thinking for yourself, people cannot control you, and you will ditch the average mindset. To have an average mentality really is to resign yourself to live a life of unreached potential. You aren't an underachiever. You're an overcomer. You're capable of achieving so much more. So that means that whatever you focus on and whatever you truly desire, be it a vision, a dream, or a goal, you can do it. Just get rid of your average mindset. Wake up every morning and make an attempt and make a commitment and make an intention that you are going to outdo your performance of yesterday. Every day, I'm going to outdo my performance from yesterday. So the kingdom of heaven is made up of the extraordinary. And because you live in the kingdom of heaven, you are extraordinary. You're not an ordinary citizen. You're an extraordinary citizen. So don't settle for average. Get rid of your average mindset, because an average mindset is the most destructive type of mentality to have, because it is accepted by a culture that will never challenge you to expand your horizon. They will never challenge you to think outside of the box. They will never challenge you to break out of the mediocre state. Why? Because they can control you as long as you're in that state. So the status quo is popular because it doesn't require any discipline. It doesn't require anyone thinking outside of the box, creativity. And a lot of times, if you stay in that kind of environment, your brilliance will be assassinated at point blank range by ignorance. And I'm going to say it again. Your brilliance will be assassinated at point blank range by ignorance. So what I want you to do is to get out of the bleachers, play full out, remove your lids, remove your limitations. Your future is filled with unlimited potentiality and possibility. And you've got to be able to think big. The next thing is, how do you think? You're going to think like royalty, because you're the child of the Most High God. And so I say to people, look, right now you might be in between blessings, but learn how to live like royalty. Just learn how to live like royalty. So I encourage people, look, even if you are living in a rundown house with the water leaking and rats and roaches running around your house, it's cool, because that's just a step towards something greater. What I want you to do is to go out, get you one piece of slab of marble. So you just go to the marble store, say you want, tell them that you want some marble samples. Get one of those marble samples, put it at your front door. Because what you're going to do, you're going to begin to train your mind to think extravagant. And you're going to train your mind to begin to plot your future along the lines of what you focus on. So when you go out your house, the Bible says you're blessed going out, blessed coming in. So put a piece of marble on the floor and your mind will go to the rest. Write your vision, where you want to go, put your vision board up, and you will be surprised of what will happen for you. I want you to think like royalty, act like royalty, walk like royalty, eat like royalty, dress like royalty, and eventually you'll begin to be treated like royalty, and then you'll rule like royalty. And it all starts in your mind. Thanks for joining. Was it really God's wish to kill Abraham's elder?
Peace, love, and prosperity, y'all.